Fabrizio Romano has reported that Ousmane Diomande could be on his way to Crystal Palace. The Ivorian centre-back has had a long list of suitors, but it seems like Selhurst Park could be his final destination. Ousmane Diomande is of course a well-known centre-back in terms of potential in games like Football Manager and even FIFA, ranking as one of the best defenders in the future. But in this video, I'm going to break down my thoughts on Diomande being a Sporting fan and why I think the transition to Crystal Palace is actually a good move for him, but we're going to take a look at the pros and of course some of the cons of this move. So if you do enjoy this content, please let me know. I've done similar videos about Giovanni Kender in the past, so make sure you check that one out as well. But without further ado, let's get into the video. First of all, I'm just going to preface this by saying if you want more in-depth analysis on Diomande in a written piece, my friend Kevin has done a fantastic job of doing his article on Diomande and why he thinks it's a great move. So check out the link in the description. Kevin has infinitely better ball knowledge than me, but I thought I'd just give my thoughts because I do differ from some of Kevin's thoughts, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely check that out in the link in the description. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the price tag because it's been reported in some different media outlets what it's going to be. So Sporting do have an 80 million euro release clause, which probably works out to about 75 or 70 million thereabouts. The actual conversion will be on screen. But I think Diomande is probably going to go for maybe, I would say, between the 45 and 60 million euro range. If I was a betting man, I would say 45 million plus add-ons in installments and stuff with bonuses of like an extra 10 million. So in my opinion, it would be like maybe 55 million, 45 million up front and the rest in installments, then some bonuses, maybe like +5 to get it to 60 and then a sell-on fee potentially. That is what I think Frederico Randes, the Sporting president, would accept. Of course, he is only aged 21 and he is an Ivorian international, so that will drive the price up as well. He's also been one of the best defenders in Liga Portugal over the last 3 years, so I would say that price is fair. If I was president, I would try and get as close to the 80 million release clause as possible, but I know that's not going to happen. And release clauses, usually in Liga Portugal, especially for Sporting, are never actually broken. Sort of if you're only Benfica with Enzo Fernandez and Joao Felix, do you get release clauses broken? Even Porto don't really get their release clauses broken. It's mainly just the Benfica thing, but that's a video for another day. So in my opinion, Diomande is exactly the kind of centre-back that Crystal Palace should be aiming to bring into Selhurst Park, especially with a potential departure in Mark Guéhi, to I believe Liverpool are the favourites to get him, but he's also been linked to Newcastle in the recent months. But in terms of Diamande's attributes, he's very fast, he's very agile, and he's also strong. And combine that with genuine defensive smarts in which he anticipates danger brilliantly, shuts down danger before it even emerges, and keeps the defence tightly structured under pressure. What I would argue sets him more apart than some of the other centre-backs is how calm he is at the ball with his feet. He doesn't just hoof it away, he stays composed, even just forward when needed, and makes accurate and intelligent passes to spark attacks. That's everything you need from a modern centre-back. Ousmane Diomande is also no stranger to the big games. In fact, one of his first ever games for Sporting and one of his biggest European nights was against Arsenal at the Emirates, and he was fantastic. In fact, all he had was 3 starts and then a game where he only played 80 minutes, where he was introduced by the lineup after winning the confidence of course, now Man United manager Ruben Amorim. With captain Sebastian Coates out with injury, Diomande commanded the backline. At just 19 years of age, he looked like a 38-year-old captain in terms of experience and how he was able to lead the line. In fact, to many Sporting fans, this was the performance that Ousmane Diomande arrived. If you look at the stats from the game against Arsenal, he played 120 minutes. Of course, Sporting would go on to win that game. 63 out of 65 passes completed, 2 out of 2 tackles won, 4 clearances, 2 out of 2 aerial duels won, and a clearance off the line. He was fantastic in that game, and he's also done very well in other games, especially that season and the season after, against better opposition like Benfica, Porto, even in some games in the Champions League and Europa League in the following seasons. In my opinion, Diomande, I think, could be one of the best centre-backs in the world if he's given the right environment, and I think that is going to be Selhurst Park. I think in some cases Diomande is still raw, of course, only being 21 with only sort of 3 or 4 years of experience that's going to happen, but I do think he is fantastic and he will get there. However, now unfortunately I'm going to have to get to the cons of Ousmane Diomande, and to be fair, there isn't a lot, but I think from what I've seen from him, especially over the last season, I think there are potentially some warning signs that you can have about Ousmane Diomande. First of all, in terms of aerial duels, Diomande is not very good, especially for someone in his size. I would argue that his sort of ability to win balls in the air is probably one of his weakest assets, and it doesn't really make sense because, like I said, he's got the frame and the height for it. He just isn't good, and I guess maybe that's going to improve with time. But in terms of defending set pieces or just winning aerial duels in general, Diomande does lack that sort of efficiency in that area. And of course there is time to improve it, but recently he's really not shown any sign of adapting and overcoming those errors. However, the biggest issue for Diomande for me is arguably his lack of concentration, or as many people call it on football Twitter and social media, the bozo gene. And I will say this season, I do feel Diomande sort of regressed a little bit. You can still see the great areas of sort of the build-up play from the back. He's still calm on the ball, all of that stuff. But in terms of sort of losing his head and just having lapses of concentration, I would argue this was Diomande's worst season for that to happen. For example, we spoke about Arsenal in the Europa League a few years ago, but if you look at Arsenal in the Champions League, Diomande loses his head almost instantly and gets a yellow card within the first 5 minutes, because from there Diomande has to be careful. He can't just go sliding into tackles like he loves to do, or he can't sort of be physical because that could result in a second yellow and a red. And from there the game was all Arsenal. Of course the final score was 5-1. They absolutely dominated us, and of course that's not all down to Diomande. That would be very harsh of me to pin that down on one player. But I think that sort of set the tone for the game, and I think as soon as he got that yellow card, I think a lot of Sporting fans were like, oh, okay, here we go, it's going to come. And then unfortunately it did, and Arsenal just absolutely dominated us. Another thing as well in terms of lapse of concentration is arguably the most infuriating moment for me as a Sporting fan this season, and that would be Porto 1, Sporting 1, in which even Fresneda gave Sporting the lead in the first half, but from then Sporting did sit back a little bit, and they were doing really well up until sort of the last 5 minutes of the game. You see, they perfected the offside trap. They got Samu offside multiple times. They were up against the cosh, but this is the most infuriating moment. Porto equalise because they do in fact beat the offside trap. Whose fault do you think it was that Samu, I believe, was onside and able to provide an assist? Of course it is Ousmane Diomande. From this picture here, you see how far back he is in the defensive line and plays Samu onside. Enough for them to get the equaliser, in which would have been a famous win for Sporting at the Estadio Dragão. Unfortunately, it was 1-1, but it does not end there, because just 2 minutes later, Ousmane Diomande gets sent off for, to be fair, headbutting is a strong word. It was more of a clash of heads, but it is fact that Diomande does lean in with his head, and then he gets sent off. So not only was he at fault for the goal, he then got sent off with a few minutes to go, where Sporting actually had a corner, which we could have done with Diomande's. You know, he's not great in the air, but he still scored a few headers from now and then, and we could have dealt with him in the box, but instead he got sent off, and unfortunately, literally 30 seconds later, Mateus Reis also gets sent off as well. 2 players sent off in sort of the last 20 seconds of the game, and of course we end up drawing that game. Unfortunately, that has to be pinned on Ousmane Diomande. But after a suspension against Arouca, Diomande is back for AVS just 2 games later. And guess what happens? He gets 2 yellow cards in 8 minutes. The first coming in the 70th, the second coming in the 78th. And he gets sent off again. And this one, again, I don't really think it was his fault. It is definitely a second bookable offence. He does stand on the guy's shin. But I do think it's accidental. But again, it's just those lapses of concentration in a game that Sporting were actually 2-1 up as well. So again, they were under the cosh away against AVS, and unfortunately AVS do come back and equalise, making the game 2-2, and Sporting get their 3rd consecutive draw. Their arguably 2nd draw of those 3 games due to an error from Diomande. And of course, I'm not pinning it all on Diomande those games. Sporting could have scored more goals, of course, but in terms of the big moments and the changing of the tides in those games, you can point to Diomande for both of those. So for me, Diomande's lapses of concentration this season has seen him, I wouldn't say plummet because that's too strong of a word, but in my opinion, I think Gonzalo Inacio has been a better centre-back than him this year, because usually it was Gonzalo Inacio the one who is making these silly mistakes, but Gonzalo Inacio seems to have improved with Sebastian Coate's absence and stepped more into that leader role, with Diomande and Eduardo Quaresma being the other centre-backs in that system. And I do think Diomande is better than Quaresma, but I do think they're both very different players for centre-backs. And I would argue out of the three, maybe Diomande has the worst lapses in concentration, and I think it's shown this season. So for me, to end off this video, I think the bottom line is that Diomande is destined for greatness. He ticks every box. He's athletic, he is intelligent when he wants to be. He is a composed footballer with the ball at his feet, and he has serious upside. Now, the lapses of concentration, of course, are the cons there, but I'm sure that will get better with age. We've seen it with other centre-backs as they've grown into their sort of years as a footballer, and of course, under someone like Oliver Glasner and a Crystal Palace team that is actually pretty good these days, I think that will definitely improve him in terms of that aspect, and he will learn as time goes on. Crystal Palace can see him as the ideal building block for this new project that they have, especially going into Europe, and I think Diomande fits in like a glove. If Guéhi leaves, which I think he will, that'll be a great replacement, and of course it will be sort of 60 million that Guéhi is going to apparently go for to Liverpool or to a Newcastle. But Crystal Palace should watch out, because in the recent months, Diomande has been linked to the likes of Arsenal, Chelsea, Juventus, even I think Bayern Munich and Real Madrid as recently. So Crystal Palace will need to hurry up if they want to get a deal over the line, because it's been years of interest. Even as soon as he came to Sporting, he was linked to Manchester City just after a few games. So he will be saying that Crystal Palace will have to hurry up if they want to get done. But that's been my opinions. I've been Sam Waseka. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to see a timeline video about how Jose Mourinho became the special one from being an unknown one, please check out that video below. It should be appearing on your screen now. But other than that, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time, and peace.